This lesson focuses on the speaking category, grammatical range and accuracy. We're going to think about what you can do to improve your speaking score in this particular area. So, as we have with other videos in this series, this is related to the speaking band score descriptors that you can find by clicking on the link below. Now, what we're doing in this video is trying to translate these descriptors, trying to think about what kinds of grammatical issues will be representative of a lower scoring student, right? Somebody in the sort of 5 to 6 range, and then comparing that to what you would need to do to score in the higher levels, right? The high 7s, 8s, okay? So we're trying to think through how do we understand this scoring category and what's represented there on the complete scoring chart, trying to translate it and make it understandable so you can think of things you can do specifically to boost your score in grammar in the speaking section. Okay, so let's take a look at some of these things. The first question to think about as you're trying to think about your grammar abilities and how they're going to be evaluated in the speaking section. Do you use a range of complex grammatical structures? A very important question to your score, because your interviewer will be listening to what kinds of sentences you're using and whether you have the ability to use a wide variety of grammatical structures. A low-scoring student will use mainly simple structures, okay, very simple sentences, all right? Now, we're not talking about errors even here. A lower-scoring student, somebody in the 5 or 6 range, will be able to use simple structures well and should not have a lot of errors with those, okay? So we're not talking about errors at all, just talking about the simplicity or the complexity of your grammar. A higher scoring student will use a much wider variety of grammatical structures. Okay, so what are we talking about when we talk about simple structures and a wide variety of more complex structures? All right, well, here are some ideas for you to think about and to use to analyze your speaking and your grammatical abilities when you speak. Okay, so first of all, let's start with the problems. Let's start with the simple structures that might be pulling your score down if these are the only kinds of structures that you're using when you speak. Okay, the first thing to note, do you use the be verb, okay, and forms of am, is, are, was, were, as your main verb in most of your sentences? That is one common feature of lower to intermediate level English, is that people overuse these verbs, am, is, are, was, were. Now, to be clear, it's not a problem to use these verbs, it's the overusing them that is the problem. In other words, many times you need to use the be verb, okay? It's grammatically necessary, and that's perfectly fine. What the problem is, the thing that can pull your score down is if almost all of your sentences have am, is, are, was, were as your main verb. Okay, so for example, if so many of your sentences look like this: I am a doctor, she was late to the party, he is not happy with his grade. These sentences are grammatically correct, but if all of your sentences look like this, or if this is what you sound like almost every sentence with these main verbs, then your sentence structures are going to be too simple. What you want to do is to think through as you're analyzing your speaking. So hopefully you're recording yourself, listening to what you say. You want to try sometimes to think of new ways to express some of these be verbs, okay? So for example, up above we have I am a doctor. We could change that to I practice medicine. That's a much more advanced sounding sentence. Even though it's just as short, it uses a better vocabulary word there. She was late to the party. She arrived late to the party. He is not happy with his grade. He disliked his grade. Okay, now you might be asking, why is this a grammar issue? This seems like vocabulary. And you're right. All we do to these sentences is to change the vocabulary. However, it becomes a grammar issue because when you change around your verbs and make them more descriptive verbs, like we have the green ones at the bottom, it will change your sentence structure, okay? Only certain sentence structures are possible if all of your verbs are forms of am, is, are, was, were. When you change the verbs around, suddenly you need to think about using objects, right? Direct and indirect objects. Or you might be able to use adverbs or adverbial phrases, right? Those are difficult, almost impossible to use with the be verb, right? So this becomes a grammar issue because when you use more different verbs, your sentences become more grammatically complex. Okay, so watch for this. Listen for yourself, and do you use too many of these be verbs? Okay, and if so, try to think about making some changes. Okay, then number 2, overuse of simple sentence constructions. This one's easier to describe. Just things like this. I studied hard in college. My mother worked hard for many years. Again, these sentences are not wrong grammatically. There's no grammar mistake in either of these sentences, okay? And that would be a good thing if you have many sentences you say in the speaking section without errors. Okay, that is a positive thing. However, if all of your sentences are simple ones like this, with just a subject and a verb, and then whatever comes after your verb there without any complexity, it can pull your score down because you're not demonstrating that you can use a wide variety of structures. Okay, so what can you do to fix this? Let's look at some positive things that you can add to your speaking in order to push your score up even higher. Okay, number 1, use connecting words and phrases. All right, so this is something you're studying, I hope, for writing as well. Using transition words and phrases like this. Just adding a few of these to the beginning of your sentence it can really help occasionally. Now, you don't want to use transition words and phrases all the time. You don't want them in every sentence. That becomes too much. But when you use them correctly, it does add a little bit of complexity to your sentence structure, and that can pull up your score a little bit. Okay, so as you're studying transition words and phrases for other parts of the test as well, think about how you can incorporate some of these in your speaking. All right. Number 2, use coordination. All right, coordination, this is something probably you've studied before. It's something even beginner English students study, but it's something that can be difficult to use, especially when you're trying to speak fluently on something like the IELTS interview. Remember to use and to think about how you can use coordination. So coordination is just creating more complex sentences, especially when you add 2 clauses together into one sentence, combining those ideas. So Jill liked the movie, but she still fell asleep at the end. All right, a little more complexity there because we've added this conjunction and we have demonstrated a relationship between those 2 ideas in one longer sentence, okay? The second one, we left the party early and then decided to get some ice cream. Now, if you need some review about coordination and using conjunctions, look in your Magoosh grammar videos on your dashboard there. We have some lessons to remind you how to use conjunctions well and how to use coordination. Okay, so this is one feature to look for as you're analyzing your responses, your recordings. Do you use coordination like this? And if not, it's something you could add. Now, even more complex and even better, as we're moving down, we're adding things that would be even better to include to boost your grammatical range score. And this is subordination. Now, coordination and subordination, slightly different. We don't have time in this video to really go over the complex grammar of these things. But again, we have videos on this in your dashboard in the grammar section. Also, I will post some links to some good grammar resources for you if these concepts are not ones you're familiar with. But you should be trying to add things like we see below: noun clauses, adjective clauses, adverb clauses. So a noun clause, we see in green there, what she said was interesting. That thing, everything in brackets there, functions as a noun. It's the subject of the sentence. That's why we call it a noun clause. Do you use that type of subordination in your sentences as you speak? Using adjective clauses well. This can be tricky. Adjective clauses are complicated, but look for them. Try to include them and use them in your speaking. Okay, so let's go to the restaurant that James suggested. Things like that, having complicated sentences with these types of clauses can help you. Adverb clauses, just the same. I ate a lot of candy when I was younger. That when I was younger tells us when this person ate a lot of candy. It functions as an adverb in this sentence. That kind of clause can be really good, and if you can use these types of clauses successfully, it can pull your score up, because these are difficult things to do fluently, and it shows that your English grammar level is quite high if you've mastered these. So it's worth your time reviewing these if you've studied them before, or learning about them if it's new. Again, I've got some resource ideas for you, and you should go to the Magoosh dashboard because we have some resources on these topics, especially adjective clauses there are ones we cover in those. Okay, then just to finish up, some additional things that you should study, some review that you should do in your grammar to help your grammatical range score. Modal verbs, passive voice, gerunds. Okay, hopefully these grammar terms are familiar to you. If not, do look them up in the resources provided below. Maybe you have a grammar textbook you use. Your ability to use these particular things and the others mentioned here will bring up your score if you can use them successfully. Okay, so a little grammar review can go a long way in your speaking section score, especially if you can use these things fluently. All right, now a second thing to consider for your grammar score. All right, we looked at grammatical range. So how many structures and how well can you use different structures when you speak? But there's a second component to your score, which is errors. How many errors do you make when you're speaking? Okay, so it's a tough thing because you want to try a lot of these difficult things, right? These complex structures, but you don't want to make a lot of errors either. All right, because a low scoring student on the IELTS is going to make a lot of what are called systematic errors. Okay, so systematic errors are ones that follow a pattern, basically, right? So maybe you have a real difficulty with past verb tenses, right? And you make a lot of mistakes with that particular category of grammar with English. That would be considered a systematic error in that case, and that would definitely bring your score down into the lower levels if you're making a lot of these systematic errors. Okay, somebody who's a high scoring response, they might make errors. IELTS does not expect that your responses are going to be completely 100% error free, right? Native speakers of English don't even have error-free sentences, okay? So they're not expecting perfection, but what they are looking for is that you don't have these systematic errors. Your errors, if you make them, should be occasional and not part of a larger system that demonstrates you don't understand a particular concept. Okay, so these will be more occasional mistakes. So what can you do as you're practicing and trying to identify errors? Maybe you don't have a grammar class or an English class that you're going to, or a teacher to help you through some of these things. Well, use some of the resources provided below. Consider one of the resources is a grammar textbook that I highly recommend for self-study. Okay, I really think it's a good one to use if you don't have a teacher and you only can work on grammar by yourself. But as you're thinking about speaking specifically, what can you do to fix your errors? Okay, so the first thing you need to do, you can't fix anything if you can't identify what it is. Okay, so you need to be able to identify errors. And so to do that, you need to record your speaking responses. If at all possible, share your recordings with somebody who speaks English, or somebody who whose English is at least as good as yours, if not better, and see if they can catch any errors that you're making regularly when you speak. When you find errors, especially systematic errors, you need to analyze them next. And then after you've analyzed, understanding what the problem is and how to fix it is part of your analysis that you need to get by looking online, in your Magoosh videos, in a textbook you might buy. Okay, so whatever resources you have, try to analyze the problem. And then you need to practice the fix. You need to find practice questions. You need to, at the very least, practice your spoken responses again, so that you're trying to fix the errors that you made the first time through. And performance, trying to use your new grammar as much as possible. And that really happens by either doing more and more practice questions or finding opportunities to use your English and trying to really focus on trying to fix errors that you know are wrong. If you have a problem with past tense errors, for example, that's something that you can think about as you're using your English in whatever place you have to do so. All right, so let's think of an example here. Let's say that you notice, or somebody points out to you, that you make a lot of mistakes with third person present S. So when you're supposed to say something, now these sentences here in the examples are errors, right? When you're supposed to say she leaves for work with an S, but you say she leave for work with no S, early every day, or he sing in a choir. These are mistakes, and these are common mistakes, a common systematic error that students make when they speak in English. Okay, so you've identified the problem. What do you need to do? Well, you need to go and find out the rule. What is the rule for present tense third person? So basically subject-verb agreement in this case. When you have a third person noun or a pronoun like he, she, or it, in the present tense, it needs the verb should have an S at the end. Okay, a basic thing people study early on in their English language studies, but somehow this mistake occurs, and even in intermediate advanced students make this mistake sometimes. Okay, so find the rule. Okay, and then the next step is to practice this thing. So how could you practice? Well, create a scenario. How about talking about someone you know well, like a parent, a sibling, or a friend, and talk about his or her habits. What do they regularly do? When you talk about people's habits, you use the present tense. And since you're talking about a friend, a family member, a sibling, you're going to be talking about them in the third person. So when you describe this person's habits, you will automatically have to use the third person present S. Okay, so this is practice, trying to identify some times, some situation when you could practice using the structure that's causing you the problem. All right, then lastly, you try to find a place to use this. And of course you can practice, just simply responding to IELTS practice questions. And then what you should do is you should listen for your error. Okay, so this is the method. This is how you would go about if you identified systematic errors. Go follow these steps and try to fix them and practice using them. Focused practice first, and then practicing using them in your performance and noticing and trying to analyze whether you have fixed the problem or whether you still need to work on this topic as you go. Okay, so to review, in order to improve your grammatical range and accuracy score, start by, well, as we just discussed, fix those errors. Fix the systematic errors. You need to find them, analyze them, and then practice them and practice overcoming these issues in a focused way, but then also in your performance, okay? And always record your responses for your practice speaking questions so you can see whether you have solved the problem or you need to continue to work on it. Also, do study some grammar, practice your grammar, and focus on those particular things mentioned in this lesson that will help push up your score, because they will show your interviewer that you have mastered these complex structures like coordination, subordination, modal verbs, all these other things that demonstrate you have a really firm command of English. Now, you may make mistakes with them. It may be difficult. You may not like grammar. I know a lot of my students don't, but it can be very worthwhile to push your score up, to review these concepts and make sure you can use them accurately and fluently when you speak. Okay, so this is our lesson on improving your grammatical range and accuracy score in the speaking test.